You might have read the article last week in the New York Times. The headline sure jumped out at me. A rabbi's enduring sermon about living your last 5 minutes. It's not too often that one of the most emailed articles in our country's paper of record includes the word rabbi, or sermon for that matter. So there I was, reading this article right before the new year descended upon us. The article is about a sermon that was delivered 30 years ago today by Rabbi Kenneth Berger. He called his sermon 5 Minutes to Live. The year was 1986. You might remember that in January of that year, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded shortly after takeoff. Rabbi Berger begins his sermon with that image, and he connects it to the Unatana Tokef prayer, the liturgy that is part of the High Holy Day Amidah, which talks about who shall live and who shall die. Those 7 astronauts in perfect health, trained impeccably for the moment that represented the high point in their careers, and in an instant, they were gone. We can understand, and unfortunately, we can relate too. In less dramatic ways, probably, but oy, can we relate. We look around this very sanctuary, and full as it is, we feel their absence. People who were here last year or 2 years ago and are no more. Some left us suddenly without warning. Others departed after long and painful and cruel struggles. Husbands and wives, parents, and even children. But here's the thing that Rabbi Berger pointed out in his sermon. Those shuttle astronauts didn't die instantly. In fact, after the explosion, NASA scientists estimated that they had about 5 minutes as the capsule fell back to Earth before the impact ended their lives. And so he asked the question, what would you do? What would you think if you knew you had just 5 minutes to live? Rabbi Berger suggested that if we knew we only had 5 minutes to live, we should think about 3 if-onlys. The first, if only I knew. If you knew today would be your last day, would you have said those unkind words to your spouse last night? If you knew today would be your last day, would you have forgotten to kiss your daughter goodbye when she left for school? If you knew that today was your last day, would you have failed to get back to your friend whom you've been meaning to call? If only you knew. How would you behave differently? The second, if only, if you knew you had but 5 minutes to live, how much more would you appreciate life itself? How much more would you realize how, despite the sorrow and suffering and pain that is an inevitable part of living, how blessed we are? If only we realized this more regular, how much more often would we stop just to say thanks for the gift of life itself? How many more blessings of gratitude would we say day by day? How much more would we realize just how lucky we are to be alive, to have shelter, good food, and plenty of it? How lucky we are to love and to be loved in return, If only we could appreciate it more. And the final, if only I could. If we had but 5 minutes to live, we might think about all the things we wished we had done in our lives. If only we had more time. The message, don't wait. Do it now. We might not have the time later, the time to be with a spouse or a friend or a child or a parent, the time to take that trip, the time to read that book that's been sitting on your nightstand for the last 2 years, the time to travel, to be outside, to hike, to walk on the beach. It's not that far away. If only. Don't wait. Don't wait till there's 5 minutes left and you realize you're out of time. Do it now. Rabbi Berger's teaching is timeless, like the Unatana Tokef prayer. It is the inevitable teaching inspired by the realization of our own finitude. Yizkor reminds us of this, but we don't need Yizkor for that. Really, we know. We know that our time is limited. So here's how Rabbi Berger concludes his sermon. He said, "Soon it will be time for Yizkor, and that scene still haunts me, the explosion, and then 5 minutes, if only I, and then the capsule hits the water. It's all over. And then you realize it's all the same. 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 years, 50 years, it's all the same. For it's over. It's over before we realize. Sunrise, sunset, swiftly fly the years, and then it's over. If only I knew. Yes, my friends, it may be the very last time." Now, if you didn't read that article in the Times last week, or if you didn't know the story of Rabbi Berger, you're going to think that what I'm about to tell you is made up. But it's not. I wouldn't do that to you. I assure you it's true. 3 years after he delivered that sermon about those astronauts falling to their deaths, Rabbi Berger and his wife and 2 of their 3 children found themselves on United Airlines Flight 232 from Denver to Chicago. They were returning from a family vacation. They'd been in the mountains, having the time of their lives. And their DC-10 airliner suffered a catastrophic engine failure, which led to a crash landing in Sioux City, Iowa. And from the time the engine failed, the pilots kept the plane in the air for another 40 minutes. And all the while, the rabbi held his wife and 2 of their children, comforting them. And due to the heroic efforts of the crew, more than half of the passengers survived the crash, including the Berger's 2 children. But the rabbi, age 42, and his wife, Aviva, age 40, didn't survive. And so, in an instant, on the way back from a family vacation on a delightful summer's day, a family is broken, and children are orphaned. A young couple is robbed of their future. In an instant, it's all gone. Friends, Yizkor is upon us. And we think about our loved ones and the lives that they lived, and the lessons that they taught us. And we're reminded of just how precious life is and how swiftly fly the years. 5 minutes, 5 years, 50 years. It's all the same, for it's over before we realize. And yet, it's not too late for us. We are alive. We can still say we're sorry. We can give thanks for what we have. We can appreciate our many gifts. It's still not too late to try something new. But friends, do it now. Do it now. For too swiftly fly the years.